Hello, my name is Autumn Brown, and I'm a researcher with Oklahoma State's Oklahoma Oral History Research Project. For our Activism and Education in the Civil Rights Movement Oral History Project, today, March 10th, 2020, I am meeting with Pastor Lee Cooper to discuss his experiences with school desegregation in Oklahoma City. Pastor Cooper, thanks so much for talking with me today. Let's just begin by telling me about yourself. Where were you born? Tell me about your family.
First of all, let me say hello, Autumn, and how blessed I am to have you today, and thank you for this interview. Well, I was born in Oklahoma City, here. Was born primarily here, stayed most of my elementary years and through my school years were here in Oklahoma City. I spent much time in Wewoka, Oklahoma, during the summers and a lot of weekends, but most of my time was spent here in Oklahoma City. So I was born actually here in Oklahoma City on Northeast 20th and Prospect, so right in that area.
Okay. What about your family?
Well, I have two sisters. One is deceased now, Gaona and Lee Bonzetta. And both of them are older, so I was the youngest of three children. I was born in 1960, and my sisters were older than I. And so most of my life was spent in a home that was purchased by my parents on 20th and Prospect. And so I grew up in Northeast Oklahoma City.
Okay. Can you describe your community when you were growing up?
Yes. My community was really a viable, vibrant, exciting community as I remember it as a young man. Always supportive. I grew up in a community where there were a lot of children my age, and so I really had an exciting and fruitful and fun, time and experience in a community that supported each other. We always, grew up in a tight-knit kind of community where all of the families took care of all of the families. Mm-hmm. And so, not only did I have my parents, my mother and father, and they were in the home, but I also had the next door neighbors' parents, and I had the neighbors down the street, their parents, and the parents around the corner. Mm-hmm. And there was just this collective sense of support, instruction, correction, all of those things that anyone in our community, any adult, really had the ability to do. And so if they felt they needed to take action, they could do that, almost understanding the consent that my parents had given as a part of the community. Mm-hmm. So that if a parent in the community corrected us, then they would usually pass that on to our parents, and then they would correct us as well. Mm-hmm. As a means of collective support. So grew up in a supportive family where my mother and father were actively involved in every PTA parent organization that there was, from elementary school all the way through high school. And not only that, but also there were community organizations such as the Mothers High and Y Club. And I don't remember all of what that was about, but I do know that in that they gave us exposure to many different things, just as, kind of helping us to be well-rounded young men and women. Well, that was a broader kind of community organization that helped to support us and helped to give us the encouragement to succeed. And so that's the kind of community that I grew up in terms of support and just really encouraging us to do better, to go further. Both of my parents did graduate from high school, but didn't go any further. But they encouraged us to pursue higher education degrees.
How did such a collective community influence your upbringing, like on a personal level?
Well, it allowed me a sense of support. It helped in terms of just knowing that I started from a place that had meager resources, but that was not the end of the story. So I think it encouraged us to be better, to do better. And when you look around at particularly people in my community, on my block, in my neighborhood, many of those people succeeded and have success stories. And I think it just helped us to have a sense of support and safety, that we knew that they had our backs.
Yeah. So one thing you said something about growing up in a community of meager resources that helped you, that propelled you to aspire for more, right?
Yes.
How do you explain the situation that's happening now, similar in the northeast side of Oklahoma City, like meager resources, things like that? What do you think the difference was between then and now, as far as how that fueled you to continue on in your career?
Right. Well, I think just what I sense from working with families today is that they don't have that same kind of collective support that many of the young people who are growing up in meager resources, families, sometimes struggle because the parents are not there, and so they don't have the support that we had. Now, both of my parents worked, but then also had uncles and aunts and other people who were involved in my upbringing that helped to fill in some of the gaps that were there. A sense of isolation now in communities that did not exist, back in the day when I was growing up. So because of that, I think sometimes young people don't have as much support as they really need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what schools did you attend growing up?
I attended Culberson Elementary School, which I walked to. It was a community school. And I walked a couple of miles to the school. I lived on 20th and Prospect, and we actually had to walk like to 13th and Lottie. And so, every day we walked to school, back and forth from school. Then I was busing, and the finger plan came into existence in Oklahoma City. And my 7th grade year, I was bused to Capitol Hill Middle School. And that was really a frightening experience. And then I went from Capitol Hill Elementary School to Southeast High School. And so both of those schools are on the south side of Oklahoma City.
What made your experience being bused to Capitol Hill Middle School so frightening?
Well, it was a time in my life of real confusion, a sense of why is this happening? Why do we have to do this? In my estimation, as an elementary schooler, everything was just fine. Everything was wonderful. Walked to school, had plenty of friends, and everything was just fine. But now I'm tossed into a situation where I have to deal with hatred, people who are, just venomous. I think that the South Side was uglier than any other part of Oklahoma City. It didn't seem that the schools on the north side had as many issues as schools on the south side. And so I remember many fights, many riots. I remember on the playgrounds kind of being segregated, whites over here, blacks over here. I remember rocks and sticks and everything being thrown at the buses. And so it was really a confusing time for me as a young person. There were just precautions that you now had to take that I was not used to. And I know that segregation existed, but we were kind of in a bubble going to our neighborhood schools. And so I had white teachers in elementary school, so it was not like I was not exposed to white people. So we had white teachers, we had even some white families that lived in our neighborhood. And so it wasn't just the fact that we had never been exposed to white people. You know, the Loft Millers lived on 19th Street. They were, you know, some of my best friends who grew up, you know. And, but this hatred and, you know, that we just, why is this, you know, why do we have to do this?
Yeah.
And at the time, you know, I know Martin Luther King had been killed and all of that, but in 1972 and 73, it just, you had to be bused all the way across town. And so it just didn't make any sense.
That's a long ride from 20th and Prospect to Capitol Hill Middle School.
Yeah, which is like on 26th and Robinson or something like that.
Yeah, a good drive.
That's correct. So it was a long ride, and it was a great distance.
What can you describe your emotions? I mean, just confusion, but I mean, was there ever were you ever fearful? I mean, you mentioned riots. Like, I mean, as a 7th grader, were you ever legitimately afraid?
Yes, and there were reasons to be afraid. You had to take precautions that you were not used to having to take.
Like what kind of precautions?
Okay, like for example, this at Capitol Hill, the locker rooms for gym class, where you had to get dressed and all of that. The locker rooms were like downstairs, and the gym was like on the 2nd and 3rd floor. The 3rd floor was the balcony. Gym floor was like on the 2nd floor. The dressing rooms were like downstairs. So as class, the bell would ring, then you would go to the gym and you would get dressed. Well, a precaution was that you never wanted to get caught late in the locker room by yourself, because sometimes bad things happen. And so you never wanted to be late to gym class or take too long to get dressed, because you did not want to be the last, you know, person in the locker room, just because bad things could happen. That's just a precaution,
right?
That a reality that you learn to deal with just because of the way things were.
Yeah.
So that's just one example, but it was just commonly known because things had happened.
So did you ever experience any of these riots that took place?
Yes.
Can you kind of describe, do you know what started it and what happened?
What started it, nothing had to happen per se. So it wasn't always an event that propelled the situation or fueled the situation. Sometimes it was just, hey, we don't want to go to school today. We're going to start something. Okay. And so that was kind of the thing that just happened. And there was this vitriol that just kept things going. It was just always there. And if something did happen, or perhaps it may have been the watching of the Roots series on TV that fueled it. Or perhaps it was something, it didn't have to be much of anything. I mean, it wasn't a significant event that had to happen.
Yeah.
And so, but it was the environment that was already charged racially and didn't need much at all. It could have been someone had a bad, night at their home, and they came to school wanting or needing to take it out on someone. And so it was just that kind of racially charged atmosphere.
So how old were you when you became aware of civil rights activism, happening?
I remember the heaviness of, I was much too young to really participate in any of the civil rights movement per se. The sit-in movement happened before I was born. But the heaviness that came with the announcement that Dr. King had been assassinated. So when you think about the fact that I was born in 1960, then what I recognized was how my parents took that news. And I remember my mom crying, and I remember kind of the worried look that my father had, almost despondent. And you see the talk, and you hear the talk, of adults. So you know that something just happened that is going to be a major event, and that is a major event. And so having received that information, then I knew that something was really, really wrong. Okay. At the time, even as a young person, my mother would take us to Johnny Brown's or to Gibson's or to other stores downtown, and she could sit us down, give us a book, and tell us to stay there and leave us. And you begin to kind of notice that people are treated differently. And at that time, I'm very young. So my first recollections are probably at 7 and 8 years old. And then you kind of start putting the picture together the older you get. I remember traveling when my parents would take us different places. We traveled really extensively. We really did. But my father literally would drive for 15 or 20 hours behind the wheel of a car. We just didn't stop until we got to where we were going. Well, it isn't until later that you begin to understand why we drove until we got to where we were going. That my mom would always cook, and so we would have dinner at the roadside picnic tables. And after we finished with lunch or dinner, which had already been prepared by my mom at home, then we would jump back in the car and continue to roll. And you don't ever put it together that we could not stop places. It was just fun to have this picnic, and you had a picnic on the roadside and you stopped somewhere. And you just kept moving. Well, it isn't until later that you began to put the picture together that we couldn't stop. There were places that we couldn't eat. And so you begin to kind of put that picture together later.
Yeah. Wow. So what high school did you graduate from?
Graduated from Southeast High School
in
1978.
And then you went on to post-secondary education. What were your experiences like at that point?
Well, of course, in high school, I played sports and had the challenges of dealing with the racial tension at Southeast High School. I remember one incident, and there are many incidents, but there were places that you couldn't walk in the hallways because you never knew, it just wasn't safe, and you never knew what could happen in certain hallways by some of the industrial classes, the woodwork and sheet metal classes and stuff like that. Well, I happen to also have been in my first hour, which was woodwork. And this particular day, there was a riot before school started. So I went to my first hour, which was the woodwork class. I happened to be the only African American in woodwork first hour. The high school woodwork teacher was Adrian Easley. He was an African American teacher. He taught woodwork. And in that particular day, Mr. Easley was out handling things in the hallway and was not in the classroom. Well, at this particular moment, I'm the only African American in class, and some of the other students decided that this was a good time to teach me a lesson. And so just as things are about to go down, then Mr. Eastwick walked back into the classroom, and everything subsided and nothing transpired. But he gave me immediately a hall pass to go to the counselor's office and transfer out of that class because I was the only African American in that class. So you asked me kind of a transition, and I'll talk a little bit about graduating from Southeast High School. I was very active in organizations, Black History Club, all of those things. MC'd the Black History programs. My parents were a part of the parent-teacher organization. I played football, was a starter on football. I ran track, I played baseball. So I had developed friendships, of course, from people that, you were on the football team with and you were on, but there was still the presence of racial slurs. So anytime Southeast was about to play Douglas High School, same conference, or Northeast High School, same conference, or Star Spencer High School, same conference, there were things that you had to deal with in terms of racial slurs and those kinds of things, and it was kind of like, we're going to kill those niggers, well, but we don't see you as a nigger because you're with us, you're on our team, and so you see that tension that you deal with. Well, here's graduate, and I have Caucasian friends, I have Indian friends, I have Black friends, but we graduate from Southeast High School, and I chose to go to Central State, University of Central Oklahoma now, but Central State. And when I get to Central State, of course, now I'm very much aware of, what the racial tension and all of those things. But I get to Central State, and I noticed the difference that people, Caucasians in particular, who I played football with, considered them to be friendly, or if not my friends. When we get to Central State, University of Central Oklahoma, then it was almost as if they did not acknowledge me and I couldn't acknowledge them because they were Black and I was white. And I'm like, this is pretty crazy. Of course, at University of Central Oklahoma, you could not really leave the campus. Remember, Edmond, Oklahoma at this time was still pretty racist and almost all white. So you couldn't even leave the campus to walk to Broadway, to the McDonald's or other places without, constantly being called nigger and, it was just really kind of, bad. So at that point, when I got to Central State, University of Central Oklahoma, they would not allow at the time any Black organization to have any activity on campus because of what one fraternity had gotten in trouble. And it was an African-American fraternity, and so they had kicked them off of the yard, so to speak. And no Black organization could have just because of what one organization did. I thought that was really crazy. Called Clara, Luper, and Ada, Lois, Sipuel, Fisher to come to the University of Central Oklahoma. And they were coming and had consented to come. President of the university at the time got wind that they were coming, called me into the president's office and asked me to tell them not to come. Well, I wouldn't do that. Ended up, they did come. We had a great session, all of that. And it was just to address the social injustice that was happening on the campus, that you could not hold every Black organization responsible for what one had did. No, I understand they did it, so you kick them off, right? Or you put them on probation or whatever. But you can't apply that broad brush. Right. So after, actually before they got there, they lifted the ban for, other organizations other than the one that they should have applied it to. Right. But that kind of community support response was always a part of what made change happen. And so that was my experience. I transferred to Bishop College in Dallas, Texas, and I got my bachelor's degree, and then went on to Virginia Union University in Richmond, Virginia, and got my master's degree. And you can see I spent some time at Harvard and at Virginia University of Lynchburg. And so when you look back on those experiences, though, it was a process of Oklahoma becoming who Oklahoma is now.
Mm-hmm. And what would you think? What would you say Oklahoma is now?
I would say Oklahoma is becoming what we should have been all the time. I think there are pockets in Oklahoma that have regressed, but for the most part, Oklahoma is progressing and making some steps towards equality that I think should have happened a long time ago.
Yeah.
But I do see some things happening. One of which is an acknowledgement of our history and our past. So you can never really have reconciliation until you first have confrontation. And being able to confront our history and our story, and to be able to tell the real side of it. It's not always sanitized like we would want it to be. It's pretty ugly. It's pretty gruesome. And you have to come to grips with that. You have to confront that and say, this is reality. This is true. Yeah. And until you're really able to have that confrontation, you can never really have reconciliation until you deal with what has transpired. Well, now you say, well, we didn't have anything to do with that. But yes, you do, because you are now clearly the recipients of the privilege that has been extended to you over years. Mm-hmm. And so you have to deal with that before you can go forward.
So what was your impression of Clara Luper and Ada Lois when they came to Central State?
Well, I knew that they were activists. I knew that they were people who were in the struggle, who were fighting the fight. And the fact that they were willing to respond, it gave me affirmation that my voice meant something. Mm-hmm. And it empowered me and the students in a way that we felt like we didn't have any recourse for a system that was unjust and that was treating us unjustly as students. We pay the same activity fees as anyone else pays. So why are we being locked out? Yeah. And we felt like it was just unjust. And because of that, then things changed. Mm-hmm. And so it was really empowering, to know that these people would take out time to come and walk with us through this issue.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And it just, because you talk about Clara Luper and you talk about Ada Lois, Sipuel Fisher, they were giants. Mm-hmm. Okay, they were giants. And then to come see about little old us, there's these little college students, it was hugely empowering for us.
Yeah. Wow. That gave me goosebumps. The last thing I wanted to ask, just going back to your time at Southeast when you were on the athletic team, mm-hmm. and your teammates would refer to other Black students as the N-word, like, let's kill these N-words, but they wouldn't look at you like that. Like, they were like, oh, you're one of us. What was that internal struggle like to see, people like you, being talked to and regarded to by your teammates, but then your teammates turning to you and saying, oh, not you. Like, what was that internal struggle like?
Well, the internal struggle was, yes, it is me, okay, because you would feel the same way about me if you didn't know me, and so there was always the issue of you would not feel as bigoted as you are if you get to know people, because they're good and bad people all over the place in every race, right. And so. It was always a struggle because you knew what their feelings were, and some of them had never really addressed or confronted those feelings until we said something about that. So as we dealt with them confronting those feelings, then for example, when I left from middle school, I had such a horrible kind of experience at Capitol Hill that I wanted to go to Millwood, all black, predominantly black at that time, school district. And I told my parents, I want to go to Millwood, and they were like, no, you're going to Southeast. And so I had to come to that resolve that they were not going to let me go to Millwood. I had to go to Southeast. So I've got to make the best of this. In that process, we had a couple of guys from the neighborhood. We knew that you could not leave the campus at Southeast to go down the street to the hamburger places, okay, that were within walking distance. Well, white students would walk to the hamburger places, and but we knew that it was not safe to go. We told guys, you can't do that. Some guys decided that they would go anyway. And I remember they were beaten with bats and chains and hospitalized. They caught them off campus and they just beat them. Well, they lived, 2 blocks away from me. I lived on 20th Street. They lived on 18th Street and a couple others. But they were all in the neighborhood. So now my parents are deathly afraid for my safety. Where I pleaded with them to go to Millwood, they told me, no, this is what we've been looking for. This is integration. This is better for you, blah, blah, blah. You got to be in the fight, blah, And I'm like, man, I would just prefer to go, to Millwood. Well, then after this event happened, then they came to me and they said, okay, we're going to transfer you to Millwood. I said, no, because now I've already made the football team. So I've already made the football team. You're not going to take me now. Okay, I've been through everything that I had to go through to make the football team. You're not going to take me now and put me in Millwood. I now have, developed coping skills. I know you can't miss the bus and get trapped on the south side. You got to make sure that, you get the bus. They're just, preventative things that you just knew that you had to do in order to best survive. Mm-hmm. So even playing football, there was the 5:30 bus. Don't miss that 5:30 bus going home, the activity bus, So now I'm integrated and trying to integrate into a culture at Southeast to make the best of a bad situation, because it was not the best situation. In spite of that, it was also times at which everything was great. And you saw flashes of what could be. Because there were good white people, there were good black people. I had a teacher, Mrs. Brackenhoff, who I thank God for to this day. She was a white woman, white teacher, but she went over and beyond for me. I can never forget that. I can never forget some of the friends that I made that became lifelong friends.
Wow.
Okay. So it wasn't all a bad experience. There were some flashes of some really good things that happened and transpired.
That's good to know. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I think really what becomes important in terms of your study is just the impact of teachers who take on the special commitment to students that allow students to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Luper was that kind of person. I remember for a Black History program, my sons went to school in Edmond. Of course, Edmond had a lot of bad memories for me growing up, but the city of Edmond changed. So my sons were in school in Edmond. Well, this particular day, Black History Month, at Charles Haskell Elementary School, Mrs. Luper was the invited speaker and guest. My son at the time is in elementary school. He's in the 3rd or 4th grade. And you can imagine the teachers are trying to keep kids in line and trying to get them to be seated over here or whatever. Well, my son gets out of line to go to speak to Mrs. Luper because he knew her and he knew of her. And as the teacher now is about to discipline my son, Mrs. Luper intervened and stepped in and then asked, tell me your name. And of course, he's named after me. And so she took the time out. Yes, I know your dad, and yes, blah, 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 and this, that, and the other. And that meant so much to my son that she would acknowledge him. Okay. Now, he probably shouldn't have been out of line. He probably should have been in line. But that affirmation from her meant so much to him as a 3rd or 4th grader. Mrs. Luper had that kind of sensitivity for students. Didn't matter for all students. She had that sense of presence that says, I'm with you and I see you. And I think every student who has ever been in any classroom she has had felt that sense of presence. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the gift that every teacher who does it for the right reason has. Yeah. And that's the impact that they have on those kids, but not only those kids, but generations of kids because of what they did for that one.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of reciprocal, generational effect.
Yes. It's funny that you use the generational word because I definitely incorporate the generational influence that she has on her students. even on her students who go into teaching and take her teaching methods and then pass that down to other generations of students. You can kind of see how that legacy has like lived on through her students and has transmits down through generations. But it's every student I interview from her class always talks about that, the fact that they were the meek kid in the back who was shy and quiet. And she wouldn't let you do that. Like she wouldn't let you just be the quiet, shy kid in the back.
Right.
And she was gonna bring you out of that shell. And they talk about the impact that they had if she hadn't have done that. And even my uncle, he got very emotional speaking about Mrs. Luper because he was just like, she saw something in me I didn't see in myself, and I don't know where I'd be if not for her. And I'm just like, God, to have that kind of impact on students, we have to study that. Like we have to study that, and we need to get that out to more teachers because obviously that method of teaching worked exceptionally well. So yes. I feel like we need to learn from that. Learn from her, Ada Fisher, and Nancy Davis. Like we should be learning from these women. So.
Absolutely. See, and I had a lot of exposure with Mrs. Luper from the Miss Black Oklahoma pageant. Mm-hmm. Okay, of which for several years I was an escort in that. She demanded perfection. She wanted it right, but she did it with a loving compassion that she raised your level of self-worth to the point that you wanted perfection. You sought perfection because you knew she expected it. But it was the passion and compassion at which she did it that lasts forever.
Where do you think her passion came from? Like,
I really have no idea. Talking to her daughter, Marilyn, she always references her grandparents, mm-hmm. So I'm sure that there was this sense of compassion and passion that was passed along to her, and it took a hold somewhere, Mm-hmm. I had a professor, Dorothy Holloman, who used to say all the time that it's caught more than taught. And so oftentimes it's your past experiences that have an accumulative effect on how you view things in the future. So your past experiences then are able to propel you into places that you could never dream of yourself going, like myself. Mm-hmm. Or those negative experiences can also weigh you down and keep you from flying and going to the places that really were meant for you to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I don't have anything.
Okay, well, I really appreciate you taking the time out. Like, you offered a really interesting perspective, a unique perspective. I don't think I've talked to anyone yet who has been bused to the South Side. I've heard about the riots, people speak about the riots, but no one that actually was there during them. So I really appreciate that perspective.
Southeast, Capitol Hill, and U.S. Grant were the worst of all.
Yeah.
Your other schools just didn't have that kind of experience. Right. But Southeast, Capitol Hill, and U.S. Grant were just, and I just don't, I just couldn't really get my mind around why it would be so bad, but it was, so yeah.
Well, again, thank you so much for talking with me today, and I'm going to stop it.
Thank you.